Welcome back to the Barrel Talk Podcast. We are back with another episode of Let's Talk About It. It's NBA Finals week. Finals starts on Thursday, so we got to get our NBA Finals preview out. So looking at this, before we get right into it, make sure to leave a like on the video. Helps out the channel a ton. If you're an audio listener, make sure to drop the podcast a 5-star rating, no matter what platform you're on. Really helps out a ton. But without getting into too much, kind of just going to be nothing else besides the series, just breaking down the finals in general. Going into this finals, I think we're in store for a really, really good finals. Not saying that the past couple of finals have been bad, but I feel like a lot of the finals didn't have much of like a storyline going into it. I think a lot of parity is going through the NBA now, and a lot of people are glad that it's not Bron versus Steph every year like it was the Warriors and the Cavs every single year for those stretches. And looking at that, I feel like this finals is really built to have a good storyline going into it. Obviously, Kyrie in Boston, KP in Dallas, but like looking at even last year's finals, like Denver, Miami, nobody really thought Miami had a real true chance in that series. But this year it's different. Like Dallas does have a tall mountain to climb with the Boston Celtics, who have been the best team in ball all year. But looking at Dallas, they have a real puncher's chance with what they've been doing. And I could argue that I feel like Dallas is going into this series throughout this playoff run is a little bit more battle-tested right now than the Boston Celtics. I know the Boston Celtics have been battle-tested, like going to however many conference finals, going to the final. It was 2 years ago versus the Golden State Warriors. But this is a whole completely different team. I know Drew Holiday's been to the finals. He's a champion. But it's just more so as a team, I feel like just throughout this playoff run, I feel like those series haven't set them up to play a team like Dallas yet. I feel like both teams are playing the best teams that they've played so far up to this point in the playoffs. But going into it, we got to talk about X Factors. I've been kind of taking a lot of different points in of this X Factor, that X Factor. I feel like everybody has their different X Factors in this series. Just looking on sports media in general. I'm going to start out with Dallas. Looking at the Twin Towers, Gafford and Lively. They've really been able to have a real impact in every single series they've played in so far. And I really feel like going into this series, this isn't really a big man series. Like going up against the Clippers, they had Zubac in there that wasn't really a floor spacer. OKC, they had Chet, who was a floor spacer, but they lacked the real interior presence to really match up with a Lively and Gafford, and that really led to both of them being able to really be productive in that series. Even with the spacing that Chet Holmgren can provide, they were dominating the glass, and they really had no answer for their physicality inside. And then going up in Minnesota, obviously Rudy Gobert and Karl-Anthony Towns. So they've been in 3 different series where they've been able to dominate, has kind of a duo in that front court. And looking at their impact, they've been able to really control the glass and rim protect. I mean, Daniel Gafford in the closeout games against Minnesota, ridiculous rim protection. And that also goes to like some of the teams that they're playing, because if you have Rudy Gobert in the game, they don't need to leave the paint ever. They can stay and be great rim protectors. But against Boston, that might be a different case, because you have Kristaps Porzingis coming back, who's going to be, I'm pretty sure he got confirmed to be ready to go for game 1. And also looking at like an Al Horford, who's been huge on this playoff run, who has been consistent from 3. He's been able to space the floor and give them a lot of great things. Al Horford may be up there in age, but he does so many different things well. But looking at kind of like, they're the X Factor, because if they can still find a way to be super impactful in this series and really show what they've been showing this entire playoff run between the two of them. I know they're kind of 2 different bigs, because when you have Lively in there and when they would blitz a pick and roll with Luka, Lively is such a quick decision maker for his position and his age to make the right pass and make the right play. Daniel Gafford's more so the rim protection side of things is better than a Lively. So they're 2 of the same but kind of different at different aspects of the game, if that makes sense, because Lively I feel like is a way better rim protector, but Lively is so much better in terms of like helping Luka and Kyrie run a half-court offense, in terms of them getting blitz and them throwing it to kind of the middle of the floor and Derek Lively being able to make a smart play. But both of them are going to be super impactful throughout this. I feel like they're still going to find a way to, Jason Kidd's going to find a way to make sure they're still very impactful. It's going to be interesting because they're athletic enough to where like I've seen them do pretty solid when it comes to switching, especially a Derek Lively. I feel like him being a rookie is crazy. I feel like he's been their biggest X factor all season. Even with him just coming off the bench, he gives them so much in his rookie year alone. It's going to be crazy to see him as a rookie in the finals really getting impactful minutes. But looking at this, I feel like they're going to be able to still be impactful. I think that they can kind of really still protect the rim. In terms of like what I'm saying game plan wise for them and what Jason Kidd likes to do, I feel like they're still going to be kind of set in stone in the paint. I think Dallas's rotations are going to be huge because of how well Boston can space the floor. But looking at what they're able to do is clean up the glass and really rim protect, because obviously Kristaps Porzingis is coming back. He's missed so much time throughout this playoff run, and you're going to throw him into the fire in a final series where he already has no finals experience. It's going to be interesting to see what they do. I feel like Daniel Gafford and Derek Lively are still going to have a huge impact on this series, but I do consider the Mavs possibly going small just to switch it up a little bit. But looking at Boston's side, looking at the flip side of things, Al Horford. This kind of... a lot of people are going to say KP. A lot of people are going to say KP is like the most important X factor in this series. I don't think so. I'm really worried about the calf. I think the calf is a real tricky thing. He's missed so much time. He's never had really any finals experience before. And I feel like Dallas is definitely going to come out and test him to see if he's fully ready to go. Obviously, if he's fully ready to go, like I assume he will be, he's going to be impactful. I'm not saying he's not going to be impactful. I'm just saying the calf thing can be tricky. We've seen it with Kevin Durant. I feel like there's going to be a lot missing, and he's definitely going to be rusty going into the series, especially game 1, possibly game 2, depending on how much he does play coming off of the injury. But I got Al Horford. He's been super steady for this Boston Celtics team. He kind of gives you kind of the same. Obviously, he's not a Kristaps Porzingis, but kind of gives you the same level of production in some ways in terms of space on the floor, being a great playmaker, being able to kind of be that steady knockdown shooter in the corner, which is what Boston needs. Boston needs that spacing in those avenues to really get to the basket, and Al Horford being in that corner, being able to space the floor and also do all the little things well. I think he's the X factor, because when you're looking at this Dallas team and looking at who they've played, really focusing on the OKC series is like OKC would have lineups out there where like Dallas is like letting Josh Giddey shoot the wide open 3. Let Josh Giddey get his. Let Josh Giddey try to beat us. Let Lou Dort take X amount of threes, see if they can beat us that way. So it's going to be interesting to see, because this is the Boston team where Jrue Holiday can beat you. Derek White can beat you. Jaylen Brown obviously and Jason Tatum can obviously beat you. But it's like Al Horford is somebody I could see them, all right, we're going to live with Al Horford shooting 8 threes this game. We're going to live with Al Horford shooting 8 to 10 threes. And if he makes 5 or 6 of them, hey, tip your cap. But like looking at this, it's like he's the guy I can see the Dallas Mavericks kind of being like, okay, in our rotations, we're going to sag a little bit and see if Al Horford can knock down 6, 7 threes. He's done it before in this playoff run already, but looking at it, if he can be aggressive and be consistent in knocking that 3 ball down, then the gears start to turn in the Celtics' favor, because that relieves pressure off of Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, especially when it comes to just getting to the basket in general. So I think Al Horford is the X factor for the Boston Celtics that a lot of people aren't really talking about, because of Kristaps coming off the injury. Don't know how he's going to look, especially getting thrown right into the finals. It's going to be interesting to see how he adapts to that. But Al Horford's been a steady guy this entire playoff run, and especially just ever since he's been in Boston. I think he's a big X factor for what he can do and kind of cancel out what Gafford and Lively really do well on the defensive side of the ball. But in terms of matchups, another thing that's going to be super interesting, like Boston switches a ton. And I think they kind of have to do that a lot more. I know you probably want Jrue Holiday to be the matchup on Luka. I think that's kind of... that's tough, because I think Jrue Holiday gives you a lot of the properties that you saw Lou Dort have in terms of giving Luka a little bit of problems, making him struggle a little bit, just with the physicality and the lateral quickness and the strength and not being able to get just pushed around by Luka. But I just think the size that Jrue Holiday has against the Luka will come into play at some point. And I think the primary matchup, if I'm Boston going into this, is Jaylen Brown. I think Jaylen Brown has the length and the size and the lateral quickness and the strength to really match up with Luka. Defensively, you're not going to stop Luka, but any way you can slow him down is going to be beneficial. But I also see a world where, like, Boston has a team, and what they've shown all year, because they don't really blitz screens a whole lot at all, really. So it's going to be interesting. I feel like they're going to really try to just play straight up, and we'll see if that works or not. They're going to try to play straight up and switch everything, I assume. So looking at that, you have a Derek White and Jrue Holiday and a Jaylen Brown and even a Jason Tatum at times, depending on if you want that Jason Tatum-Luka Doncic matchup to happen a whole lot in the switching game and the switching department. But it's Luka Doncic. I feel like he's a type of player to where you can't really play him straight up. He's so tough to guard. And it's such a tough ask, even by Jrue Holiday, who I feel like has been the best defender in the NBA for the past decade. And looking at Jaylen Brown, who's no slouch on defense. Looking at Derek White, who's an all-defensive kind of player. It's such a tough ask to ask them to match up with Luka one-on-one and not get in foul trouble, because that Boston bench is very thin. So looking at the matchup with Luka, having a fresh body on him for mainly most times is going to be beneficial to them, because if Boston likes to switch a lot, that could be beneficial. Them getting a Derek White, Jrue Holiday, Jaylen Brown on them at all times is going to be super beneficial. But when we saw in Minnesota, when Minnesota blitzed the pick and roll with Luka, Luka just said, F the pick and roll. I'm just going to go one-on-one against Jaden McDaniels, who's one of the best defenders in the world at his size and his length. And he went to work every single time. I don't really see or envision anything different happening with Boston. I understand Jrue Holiday's a great defender. Jaylen Brown's a great defender. Derek White's a great defender. The one-on-one game with Luka it's so tough to ask with how much he can get you in foul trouble, with how tiring it can be. Like, it could having to guard a Luka Doncic can take Jrue Holiday completely out of the game offensively because of how much he's working defensively. So looking at that, it's going to be super, super interesting to see how they match up with on Thursday. I want to see how Joe Mazzulla kind of comes out and really picks his poison and who the matchup is going to be. I envision the matchup being Jrue Holiday to start the series, but I feel like as the series progresses and goes on, I feel like Jaylen Brown will kind of take on that challenge, just because I just feel like it's a better matchup. I really like Derek White and Jrue Holiday focus more on Kyrie Irving. I really like Jaylen Brown focused on a Luka Doncic. I just feel like body-wise, it just makes more sense. And I feel like, I'm not saying Jrue Holiday isn't going to get his minutes on Luka, but I feel like in terms of different stretches throughout the game, I could definitely see Jaylen Brown stepping up and taking that challenge defensively. And looking at what they have in terms of the others on Dallas, like a Kyrie Irving, he's going to be huge in this series. You could argue he's the X factor for Dallas and his aggression and what he's able to do offensively. Kind of talking about how they came out in that game 1 versus Minnesota. I mean, Kyrie put pedal to the metal. Control the pace, control the pace, control the pace. That's the biggest thing I have with Dallas Mavericks in the terms of how they can win this series is the pace of the game. When you look at that game 1 in Minnesota, they completely ran Minnesota out of their own gym. They controlled the pace throughout the entire first half and then really set the tone for the second half. And that starts with Kyrie Irving. When you look at game 1, for Boston and the Pacers, it was Indiana just pushing and pushing and pushing the pace. Not saying Dallas has the ability to play as fast as Indiana throughout the entire pace of the game, but Dallas has a Luka Doncic who you can't speed up, a Kyrie Irving who you can't speed up. So they're going to be able to control the game at points and at certain stretches. So looking at what Boston is, the Dallas Mavericks need to do a good job of getting them uncomfortable. And I think that's what the Pacers kind of did in those first 2 games in Boston. Control the pace, forcing Boston into a lot of out-of-character shots, kind of just settling a lot, getting a lot of quick shots early in the shot clock. I feel like that is what makes Boston uncomfortable. They're a team that we've seen shoot themselves out of games. And I feel like with what Dallas can do with the pace and their defense and their rim protection, they could make Boston just settle for a bunch of threes that they probably don't want to take. And Boston's a great offense. I mean, you're splitting hairs here, trying to figure out a way to kind of stop this Boston Celtics team. And I think this is the way that they can do it. It's more so on themselves. I feel like they can shoot themselves out of a lot of games. In terms of the pace of the game, I feel like Boston can kind of get sloppy offensively and kind of just let the other team kind of control the pace and just think that they can just throw up shots here and there. I feel like that's a big reason why a lot of those Indiana Pacers games were close, is because Indiana was getting a ton of good open looks and knocking them down at an elite level, which I do think Dallas can do. But it's also like the shot selection of Boston, and it's like a lot of those times where the pace was going up and down in that Indiana series, it's like a lot of shots, especially in like those third quarters, just bad shot selection early in the shot clock, shots that didn't make sense for the possession. So I just feel like in terms of that, it's going to be very interesting to see how Dallas controls the pace. And I feel like Dallas probably should look to play a little faster to start game one, kind of like what they did in the Minnesota series. Because when you're looking at how that series started in Minnesota, for Dallas, I mean, they really controlled the pace, and Kyrie came out with a sense of urgency, which I do anticipate them to do for game one. I feel like they're going to be a high-paced team, especially in that first quarter, to kind of just throw the first punch at Boston and see how Boston responds. But in terms of Boston matching up with Dallas matching up with Boston, it's going to be very interesting to see. I probably like Derrick Jones Jr. getting the Jason Tatum assignment. And I got like P.J. Washington getting the Jaylen Brown assignment. I think P.J. Washington's a much more physical defender. Jaylen Brown likes to get downhill a lot more. And I feel like Derrick Jones Jr. has more of the length and the quickness to stay with Jason Tatum. Obviously, Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown have been phenomenal on this playoff run. But it's interesting to see because they, like I said, I think the X factor is the Twin Towers and Gafford and Lively. I think if they can really have that impact that they had all playoff run, it could get scary for Boston, because if you're Boston, are you running a drop? Like if you're having KP in the game and Al Horford into the game and seeing what they have done with them, if you're gonna have them in a drop, you're gonna allow kind of Kyrie and Luka to work in that mid range, which we saw them do this playoff run. We saw Luka Doncic operate in that mid-range a lot more than he has in past years. We've seen Kyrie Irving obviously operate in the mid-range. So if both of them are being able to get to the mid-range consistently and you're running a drop, then you're going to be forced to go to switch, and then you can get that matchup for the lob, or you can get Luka the matchup he wants on him. So it's really going to be a chess match between Jason Kidd and Joe Mazzulla to see how they adapt and react to what they're doing. In terms of game one on Thursday, it's going to be interesting to see. Me personally, I'm going to go Dallas. I'm going to go Dallas in about 6 or 7. I just think with what Kyrie and Luka are doing right now, I think they have the best player in the series. I think at certain points you can argue they have the two best players in the series, depending on what kind of Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown you do get. So it's going to be interesting to see how they match up. I think Dallas is going to look to push the pace in game one especially, and I think Joe Mazzulla is going to have his hands full kind of trying to pick his poison and what he decides to go defensively in guarding Luka and Kyrie. And I think Jason Kidd's going to have to figure out a way to kind of make sure Derek Lively and Daniel Gafford still have a big impact with the spacing that Boston does have. And I think when you're looking at Boston, I think that bench could come into a situation because of how good Luka is at getting the opposing players in foul trouble, especially in guarding him. That's why I think the primary option needs to kind of play him straight up. I think Jrue Holiday is IQ-wise is the best defender you can put on him, but I think size-wise is Jaylen Brown. So it's going to be interesting to see how they start out. I'm interested to see how they start out on Luka Doncic in game one. But looking at this, I feel like storytelling-wise and hype-wise, we had a whole week off. We're not going into this series with like this person or that person hurt. I know KP's banged up, obviously, but we're going into the series with a whole week off of rest. Obviously, the whole week off of no basketball has been tough, obviously. But going into this whole week off, everybody's going to be fresh for game one on Thursday. Very exciting to see the kind of matchup and the battle that Joe Mazzulla and Jason Kidd have as coaches, and all the storylines going into it. Somebody's got to get their first ring in terms of Luka Doncic, Jason Tatum. It's going to be interesting to see, but that's all I have for this episode of Let's Talk About It. Thank you guys for tuning into the Barrel Talk Podcast. Hope you tune in to future episodes.